So every year, the Indian government tables its budget. It's this massive, complicated financial plan that, let's be honest, can feel pretty overwhelming. But really, when you boil it all down, it's just a plan for earning and spending money. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to deconstruct the 2026-27 budget and just follow the money. Okay, first things first, let's just try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this. The government plans to spend over 53 lakh crore rupees. I mean, that's a number so huge it's hard to even picture it. We're talking about a 5 followed by 13 zeros. It's astronomical. Right, so a number that big naturally leads to the two most basic questions you can ask about any budget. Where on earth does all this money come from? And then, once the government has it, where does it all go? Let's start by following the trail, beginning with where the money comes in. You know, just like your own personal budget probably starts with your paycheck, the government's budget starts with its receipts, basically its total income. So let's break down how every single rupee the government collects is sourced. To make this super easy to understand, let's imagine all of the government's income is just a single rupee. This chart here breaks that 1 rupee down into paisa, showing us exactly where each piece comes from. Let's start with the biggest slices of the pie. Now, you'd probably guess that taxes are the biggest source of income, right? Well, surprise, they're not. The largest slice, a full 24 paisa of every rupee, actually comes from borrowings and other liabilities. This means for every rupee the government gets, almost a quarter of it is borrowed. Now, keep that in mind because it's going to be really important later on. All right, and this is where you personally come into the picture. The second biggest slice at 21% is personal income tax. Yep, that's the direct contribution from the salaries and incomes of people just like you all across the country. And when you add in corporation tax and GST, you can see how taxes really form the backbone of the government's actual earnings. Okay, so that's the income side of the equation. We've seen how the government fills its pockets. Now, it's time to flip the coin and see where all that cash actually gets spent. And yeah, you guessed it, we've got another one of these charts. Just like before, this shows where every single rupee of government spending is headed. Each slice is a different priority, everything from defense to subsidies. But again, let's zoom in on the two biggest expenses. Now, this one might actually surprise you a little. The largest chunk of spending, 22 paisa of every single rupee, isn't actually spent by the central government at all. It's transferred directly to the states as their share of the taxes that were collected. This is a really fundamental part of India's federal structure, and it makes sure that states have the money they need to run their own programs. And remember all that borrowing we talked about? Well, here's where it really hits. The second biggest expense, at a massive 20%, is just paying the interest on old loans. It's kind of like the minimum payment on a massive national credit card. It's money that isn't going towards new roads or hospitals, but just to service the debt we already have. So if you've been connecting the dots here, you might have noticed something. There's a pretty big gap, right? The government earns a certain amount from taxes and things, but its spending plans are, well, a lot bigger. That gap has a very specific name. It's called the fiscal deficit, and put really simply, it's the shortfall between what the government earns, and that's not counting the money it borrows, and what it spends. It tells us exactly how much the government needs to borrow in a single year just to make ends meet. For this budget, the 2026-27 one, the deficit is pegged at about 4.3% of India's gross domestic product, or GDP. Measuring it this way against the size of the entire Indian economy helps us understand if this shortfall is a big deal or, manageable. But honestly, that number by itself doesn't tell you the whole story. What's really crucial here is the trend. As you can see from this chart, the deficit has actually been coming down steadily over the last few years. This path is what economists call fiscal consolidation, and it basically signals that the government is trying to get its finances on a more sustainable track. So, that brings us full circle, doesn't it? We know there's a shortfall, we know the government has to borrow, but how do they actually do it? Where does the borrowed money come from? Well, this table breaks it down for us. The vast majority of it, as you can see, comes from market borrowings. This basically means the government issues IOUs, or bonds, and big players like banks, insurance companies, and other investors buy them up. This is the main way the government funds its deficit year in and year out. Okay, so far we've been all about the numbers, the what. But what's the story behind the numbers? What's the government's big strategic bet in this budget? To really get that, we need to look at how it's spending, not just how much. And to understand that strategy, you just need to know the difference between two kinds of spending: First, you've got revenue expenditure. Think of this like your daily household costs, groceries, bills, salaries, subsidies. But then you have capital expenditure, or CapEx. That's the big stuff, the long-term investments like new highways, ports, and railways. It's less like buying groceries and more like putting a down payment on a house. And this right here is the real punchline of this budget story. If you look at the last few years, the share of that capital expenditure, that investment spending, has been going up and up. The government is making a very conscious choice to put more and more of its money into building assets for the future, instead of just covering today's running costs. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't just our interpretation. The official budget document itself points to this trend, literally calling it a sign of improved quality of expenditure. The big bet is that these investments in infrastructure are going to pay off down the road by boosting the whole economy. So we've gone from that mind-bogglingly huge 13-digit number all the way down to this one key strategic choice. And it really just leaves you with one final thought. As the government keeps betting bigger on building for the future, what impact will you start to see? What new roads, bridges, or public services will start taking shape right where you live?